Hi, I'm Andy, and this is my lesson on printing and searching 2D arrays in Java. In this lesson, I'll show you how to use for loops to print the elements of a 2D array. I'll also show you how to search a 2D array for its largest and smallest values. Let's get started. Let's start with this 2D array called gradebook. We want to print the gradebook with spaces separating each number in each row. We'll do that with a separate method called print2darray. This method has just one parameter, a reference to the 2D array that will be printed. In the method body, to print one of the array's rows, we'll use a for loop to repeatedly print an element followed by a space. And then we need to repeat that process for each row in the array. That means we need to use a nested for loop. The outer for loop will traverse from one row to the next, while the inner for loop will traverse over the elements in each row. We'll start our outer for loop by declaring a variable called r, which will stand for the row index. The first row index is 0. The last row index is always one less than the number of rows in the array. For example, this 2D array has 3 rows and the last index is 2. So we want r to vary from 0 up to, but not including, the number of rows in the array. Well, remember, the number of rows in a 2D array is given by the array's length property. So we'll put r less than the array.length as the for loop's conditional statement. At the end of each loop, r needs to be incremented by 1. So this for loop traverses from row to row. Now we need to write the inner for loop that traverses along the row by going from one column to the next. We'll start by declaring a variable called c, which will stand for the column index. The first column index is 0. Remember, each row of a 2D array is actually a 1D array. So this loop needs to end as soon as c is equal to the length of the current 1D array, like this. And c will be incremented by 1 each time through the loop, so that we visit each and every element in the row. In this for loop body, we need to print the element at index r and c, followed by a space. After we finish printing a row's elements using the inner for loop, we need to print a new line so that the next row is printed on the next line. We can do that with a blank print line statement. Let's go ahead and try this method out on our gradebook array. So it looks like we forgot one little thing here. The print2darray method is being called by a static method, main in this case. Therefore, print2darray also needs to be static. Let's make that change and try again. Good, so that worked. Now let's write another method, this one called findMinMax. This method will return a 1D array and will be passed a 2D array of integers. The job of this method is to find the smallest and biggest numbers in the 2D array and return them. it will return those two numbers by packaging them up into a 1D array. Let's start by making two integer variables called min and max to hold the smallest and biggest numbers. We'll initialize both of them to the value at index 0, 0 in the array. Now we need to go through the entire 2D array, one element at a time. If we find an element that is bigger than max or smaller than min, we'll update those values accordingly. In the previous method, I showed you how to iterate over a 2D array using a regular for loop. That works perfectly fine, but for this method, I want to show you how you can iterate using a for each loop instead. To do that, we write for, followed by a declaration of a variable to hold each element of our array. Well, remember, a 2D array is an array of arrays, meaning the elements of a 2D array are themselves arrays. For example, our gradebook 2D array consists of these three arrays. So each thing in our 2D array is a 1D integer array. We'll call each of those arrays row, since we like to picture them as rows in a table. Our inner for loop then iterates through the elements in row. Those are simply integers. So we'll write for each int num in row. In the for loop body, we need to check to see if num is greater than max. If so, we'll reassign max's value. Likewise, if num is less than min, we need to reassign min's value. And that's it for the nested for each loop. Now all we need to do is store min and max in a 1D array and return it. Let's test out this method on gradebook. We'll first get the 1D array by invoking the find min max method. Then we'll print the min, which is at index 0 of that 1D array, and max, which is at index 1. Good, so that's how you can search through an entire 2D array using a for each loop. Remember, as long as you're not changing the elements of the array, it's usually easier to iterate over that array using a for each loop rather than a regular for loop. And that wraps up this lesson on printing and searching 2D arrays in Java. I'm Andy. Thanks for watching and coding with me today.